Hey, I'm John Allure. Before you listen to this episode, a couple of things. These are podcasts from the first season of Who Killed Teresa, and they're very raw. They were unedited. I haven't gone back and checked over them. I pondered about whether I should do these. Many people found them, I do, amateurish and kind of not very good, but others really kind of liked that raw nature to them. So I've just released them as they are. Don't come to me asking questions about them. This was an iterative process. So what I thought 7 years ago is not what I believe today. And then on that note, I'll be closing down Who Killed Teresa over the next 6 months. I'll run the remaining of the first season episodes. But I've started a new podcast called Undiluted Hocus Pocus, The Wonder of Problems. We'll talk about puzzles and games, and sometimes we'll talk about unsolved murders and police negligence. And you can find that on Spreaker at Undiluted Hocus Pocus. Also, you can check it out on all your major platforms, Spotify and iTunes, etc. And we'll set up social media pages for it as well. So it's a pretty unique name, Undiluted Hocus Pocus. If you put it into a search engine, I'm sure you'll find us. Thanks for listening, and once again, life isn't fair, justice is blind and dysfunctional, and some cops aren't smart like on television. This is Who Killed Teresa. Hi, welcome to the podcast. This is Who Killed Teresa, and I'm your host, John Allure. It's a podcast where we talk about a series of unsolved crimes, particularly in the region of Quebec from the 1970s, early 1980s. I was going to start this earlier this morning. It's a Saturday morning here in North Carolina. But I felt like I just needed to get outside, get some air, get some fresh air. So I went over to my local farmer's market, bought some beets from my farmer, Alex and Betsy, and listened to some music by some local musicians, Donovan and Jimmy Magoo, so that was nice. And then on the way home, I stopped at my ex-wife's house. And I always feel strange saying ex-wife, but I don't know how to say it. Ex-partner, my former partner, whatever. But you get the idea. She lives actually a few blocks away from me. As we have three daughters, I wouldn't call it a friendship, but we have a partnership in raising our three daughters. So we get along quite well. And we were talking, among other things, about Chris Cornell died this week from Soundgarden. And I would describe myself as an average Soundgarden fan. Certainly had the CDs Super Unknown and Down on the Upside. Definitely remember listening to Super Unknown when I was living in Toronto, and then later the follow-up album, Down the Upside, in Los Angeles. But somehow I don't know, I stopped listening, or mostly because the music is really dark, and right around that time is when my wife and I had our first child, so we quickly moved to, kinder, gentler music, a lot of children's stuff, Woody Guthrie's children's stuff, a lot of James Taylor, Lyle Lovett. This kind of went into a mellower phase, and a lot of that grunge stuff got forgotten. But in listening to it recently, it's man, that stuff is dark. Pretty noose. I mean, when you consider that the guy did a concert, went home and hung himself in his hotel room. Apparently, prescription drugs may have played into this. Pretty Noose describes this event completely. I don't like what you have me hanging from. It's like, whoa, Mailman. Another song is just incredibly dark. And listening to it, it really kind of made me very, very sad about the whole situation with Chris Cornell dying. The band Living Colour, Vernon Reid's band, does a nice tribute, I think, from a concert they did last night of Blow Up the Outside. Check it out. It's pretty good. Anyway, we were talking about this, and among other things, also, my wife's father passed last fall in a very, very tragic event. He was in the mountains in the Asheville area, North Carolina, on an ATV with a friend. The ATV flipped and he died, and the driver of the ATV vehicle survived and pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter and is scheduled to be sentenced this week. That's the only details I'll reveal of that case, but she was telling me how she had to file a victim's impact statement on the case and was quite heavily involved with the assistant district attorney up there. Very obviously painful and tragic thing for her to go through, let alone my daughters, because of course it's their grandfather. But again, elements of medication and depression played into that case. That's about as far as I go, and it's very sad. And I guess what I'm saying is I know everyone struggles with these things, and so it's been on my mind. And I would simply say, take care of yourself, people. It's our 24th episode. This is a dark subject matter, I know, and not everybody is a survivor of a murder victim. Some are, some aren't. And the majority of listeners, though, are not. But I know people struggle with issues and depression. And take care of yourself. Moving on. This appeared in the Montreal Gazette this week. I want to read it out. A Saint Laurent borough resident has received a 15-year sentence for his attempt to murder an 11-year-old girl he knew very well. The 45-year-old man, whose name cannot be published, was left with a 9-year prison term when Quebec Court Judge Sylvie Kovacevic delivered her decision at the Montreal courthouse on Thursday. He has been detained since his arrest in May 2013, hours after the crime was committed. The man's name cannot be published because the information might identify the victim in the case. Her identity is protected by a court-ordered publication ban. The man was so close to the girl's mother, she thought of him as an uncle. Evidence heard during the trial indicates the man was having a secret affair with the girl's mother when he strangled the girl with her own skipping rope on May 26, 2013. The girl was left to die in an alley while it was raining outside. She regained consciousness and found help at the home of a friend who lived nearby. The Crown's theory during the lengthy trial was that the man strangled the girl and molested her while she was unconscious. The man was also accused of sexual assault, but he was acquitted on that charge. The young girl's training bra was torn after she regained consciousness. The man testified in his own defense during the trial and tried to blame what happened on two men that he did not know. He said he tried to protect the girl, but his version of what happened made little sense. The victim also testified. She said she was watching television while alone with the man in her mother's apartment when the man suddenly asked questions about a necklace she was wearing. During that conversation, the girl said the man grabbed her skipping rope and began strangling her with it. As she struggled for breath, she fell to the floor and he climbed on top of her before she blacked out. Now, for some of you, you will be familiar with this case. What's missing from the story, if you are familiar with it, is the fact that the agency in charge was once again the Montreal Police, SPVM, and during the course of their investigation, they destroyed all the evidence, 17 pieces of evidence, including the training bra and the attempted murder weapon, the skipping rope. And so, thank goodness they got a conviction at all in the matter Fortunately, the victim survived and could actually talk about what happened. Otherwise, we might not have this unidentified man going away for 15 years. And the SPVM's excuse, again, in this matter, was that they said they didn't have enough storage space for the evidence, so they tossed it. Just let that sit with yourselves for a moment. City of Montreal celebrated its 375th birthday this week. And in the midst of the celebration, 2,000 Montreal police officers decided to hold a protest. Now that's fine. Where would Quebec be without conflict? It seems to be in the very ethos of the entire province. But seriously? Who watches the watchmen? Who guards the guardians, I always say. And someone needs to watch the Montreal police. So let's talk about another Montreal case. Recently, a woman named Mary Claude contacted me and asked, had I ever heard of her mother's murder case? I hadn't. She sent me the information, and I'll give you the particulars here. The woman's name was Suzanne Blanchard. She's a 37-year-old mother of 2 children. And she lived in the East End of Montreal. From 1979 to 1981, the family lived at 5053 Christophe Colomb. On August 9th, 1982, Suzanne Blanchard was last seen around 6:30 p.m. at the corner of Saint-Hubert and Gregoire Streets. On August 13th, 4 days later, the body is discovered. It's found floating in the water near Saint-Anne-de-Bellevue. Saint-Anne-de-Bellevue is off the island of Montreal. It's very, very far west. We've actually never really dealt with a case in that region before. The closest one that I can think of in a similar area, but on the other side of the river, is the case of Joanne Dorion. She's found in her dress and petticoat with her underwear pulled down to about her knees, and she's wearing all her jewelry. There's a masking tape found around her neck, or maybe it got dislodged from the mouth. And there's evidence of cuts on the throat, but bizarrely, the coroner can't say precisely how she died. It's ruled a violent death, but he doesn't go precisely into the details, although and it's my understanding from the daughter, from Mary Claude, was that for years there was even some speculation as to whether this was some kind of violent crime or sex crime, and I don't even know if there might have been a bit of victim blaming going on there. But from what I know, the very fact that the underwear is pulled down to the knee, you can make the argument that the water did that. I don't think that is the case at all. Things to note about this case. So August 1982, it would be a case we would be adding. The last one we talked about was Tammy Leakey, was 1981, and that's about as far as my timeline went. Curiously, 5053 Christophe Colomb, that's 2 blocks away from where Lison Blais lived. Lison Blais lived at 4685 Christophe Colomb. And if you recall, Lison Blais was strangled in the backyard of her parents' East End house in the summer of 1978. So at a similar time, when the Blanchard family was living on Christophe Colomb, they were both contiguously living in the same area. Mary Claude has been very diligent in trying to get answers and come to some kind of conclusion with the matter of the murder of her mother. She's done all the right things, done research, much like me, found through public information requests, the police reports, the coroner's report, etc. But she seems to continually be getting stonewalled, not only by the Montreal police, the SPVM, but apparently she's not getting a lot of help at all in this matter. Do I think this is a case that I would add to the portfolio of cases that we've been discussing? Well, you never know. Possibly, although there are some indications that potentially this might have been a matter of very specific domestic violence and it's not related. And anyway, the commonality that I want to bring up in mentioning the death of Suzanne Blanchard has less to do with who murdered her, but a topic that we talk about repeatedly on this podcast, and that's the notion of criminal investigative failures, and in particular, investigative failures at the hands of the Montreal Urban Police Force, the SPVM. And the reoccurrence of their mishandling of these matters is staggering. We just heard of a case, the case we were talking about earlier of the skipping rope, a child who was attempted to be murdered with a skipping rope. That happened 2013. And now we're talking about a case 30 to 40 years earlier at the hands of the same agency. And all I can say is, with a similar pattern of investigative negligence. I am not permitted to say specifically what I'm talking about for reasons of that there is an ongoing investigation and I won't get into. But I think you can figure out, in the way, if I've planted this right and told it right, I think you can figure out the particular instance of criminal investigative failure that occurred in the case of Suzanne Blanchard. And when the Montreal police were questioned about how such a colossal fuck-up could have occurred again, their response was, well, we ran out of room. And it just leaves you shaking your head. How long do the people of Quebec and Montreal have to put up with this injustice? The writer Patricia Pearson wrote about it years ago in an article in Maclean's magazine in Canada about the double victimization of these Quebec victims, victimized once at the hand of the assailant and a second time at the hands of the Quebec justice system. And I ponder this. I ponder this. It leaves me troubled. About 10 years ago, I took a vacation in the fall. I think it was the fall of it was the fall of 2007. My parents were in Quebec City that fall, staying at the Chateau Frontenac, and I had a break from things and decided to just go and be with them for 2 or 3 days and just kind of cut it loose and enjoy what is a fantastic city if you've never been. And so I got on a plane and I went. This would have been just after Halloween, so November, and I was there with them and having a great time. You know, just in the Chateau Frontenac, and then, walking on the promenade, which is out front, which overlooks the St. Lawrence River. And, Quebec City is the closest you're going to get to Europe because it's so old. It feels very much like a European town. And I was just going for walks and really taking it easy. And one day I went out. I went for a walk outside the hotel. I went down. It's a little alleyway called Rue Trésor, where artisans usually have paintings and things like this. And I was walking down it, just enjoying the whole day, and walked right into a "Have you seen this girl?" poster. And it was a poster that the kid, Cédrica Provencher. Now, at that time, Provencher had been missing since the summer of 2007. She went missing from Trois-Rivières, where she lived. And it wouldn't be until, I believe, it was last year, nearly 9 years later, her body was recovered about a mile away from where she disappeared in Trois-Rivières. And it's still an unsolved case, but a case that haunts Quebec for similar reasons, because it's not been solved and because there have been investigative blunders along the way. But on this particular day, I wasn't thinking of any of that. This was my introduction to Cédrica Provencher, was seeing this photo of this girl and asking the public if anyone had any information. This girl has disappeared from Trois-Rivières. She's this height and this weight, and she's last seen wearing this. She has this kind of hair. Please phone this number if you've seen this girl. And those things are always sad. And these cases, they always start with that. And it always strikes me how they take usually one of the most personal photos you can think of. And it's usually a school photo. And they make that personal memory very, very public. Did it with Cédrica. They did it with my sister. I think they took a photo booth photo of hers, and she probably would have been out with friends just fooling around at the mall, and went into one of those photo booths, took a strip of 4 photos, and then that landed on the poster that said, "Have you seen this girl?" All of a sudden, something very personal becomes very, very public, and it's invasive and traumatizing, frankly. The photo most used in my sister's case is it's a photo of Teresa in a green shirt with white pants. It was used as the sort of the "Who Killed Teresa" photo. And now I think nothing of it. That's what it is. It's the "Who Killed Teresa" photo. But it didn't start that way. That's a photo taken in my parents' kitchen in St. John, New Brunswick, of Teresa making a sandwich or an English muffin or a bagel, something like that. And I took it. I took that photo. It was an event. It was like a Saturday morning. She had come home that summer for a visit in the fall of '78, and that picture was taken. Now, funnily enough, it's a photo that I've used, as I say, for journalistic purposes. I've used it on the Wikipedia page for Teresa, and I'm currently in an argument with whoever is in charge of the crawling and trolling through Wikipedia to make what they, I guess, allege are corrections, because I keep putting the photo up, and some anonymous person that I don't know, or several of them, keep taking the photo down and saying, "We don't have proof that this is your photo," which I suppose technically is right, and I don't know how I could ever prove to anyone that it is in fact my photo. But I've gone to great lengths to explain to people that, listen, I took it, this is when I took it. It first appeared on the internet in the summer of 2003. You won't see it before then. The very fact that I can track the history of that photo on the internet should tell you that maybe I'm the one responsible for putting it on the internet. And yes, and saying, it's in the public domain. Anyone can use it. I don't care. Go for it. Have at it. Nevertheless, I keep coming back. It's gone. Somebody said, well, we don't know that J. Allure is John Allure. So we're taking this down. It's funny to me, but it also enrages me. How dare you, sir, or madam, how dare you have the nerve to take a page that I constructed based on very tragic facts and come in there and manipulate it in the name of better quality information, I suppose. I saw another one of those photos this week. I believe it was in British Columbia. A family disappeared. Mother, father, their child. And I think the ultimate outcome was not good. Two of them at least were found dead. Third was still missing. But it was a family photo. It was the entire family with Santa Claus. Christmas card or something like that. And I thought, how terrible that photo had to be used for this purpose. Very personal Christmas memory. And there it is. Have you seen this family? Just tragic stuff that make you weep. About a year ago at this time, I was in Montreal. It was a Sunday morning, and there were a bunch of us in a conference room at the Hotel Bonaventure in Montreal. There was myself, Georges Bazinet, the brother of Denis Bazinet, Solange Blais, sister of Liaison Blais, the Pryor family, Yvonne, and the sisters Doreen and Maureen, who are the sisters of Sharon. Stéphane Luce, who you don't know, but his mother, Roxanne, unsolved murdered in Montreal. And the whole Joanne Dorion family. I can't too many to remember. Lee's brother, etc. And ostensibly, we were there we were meeting with a lawyer and talking justice, and I'm going to send a letter to the Minister of Public Security, etc., etc., etc. But, looking around the room, and myself included, some pretty broken people, at times not completely able to function. I mean, we function. I have a job. I have a family, as they do. But then there's this thing that we're still dealing with that has chewed us up. Not because the perpetrator hasn't been found. Believe me, that is secondary to the fact that the Quebec justice system, and in particular Quebec law enforcement, has treated this set of victims so preposterously unfairly. And it was for one morning there. I think one morning is all we could probably bear of each other. It becomes quite uncomfortable after a while there. You share a memory. I think there was some sharing of photos, etc. The Dorians had a series of big binders on the case, about 2 or 3, I believe, with newspaper clippings, etc. I didn't bring anything because I had to fly there. Everyone else drove, of course, because they're from the Montreal area. But I have file boxes of paper information, although I'm trying to wean myself off the paper, make everything digital. But there's only so much of that we can do sitting there sharing information and actually just slowly getting angrier and angrier as we share our history of injustice. I think ultimately, if there are any benefits to social media, there is this one I have noticed. We communicate better, this group of people, through social media. It's a better form for us because there's a separation. We can just talk about facts and then we can go away. And the distance is very, very helpful. It's frankly very, very helpful to talk to the world about this topic and not have a single clue about who in hell I'm talking to or addressing. That's actually very, very helpful. I'd rather do that than have a one-on-one with my psychiatrist or my. I don't particularly want to talk about any of this with friends, quite frankly. But to have that filter of anonymity and to then go look and say, wow, Australia, who killed Teresa's really trending in Australia this week, or the UK. I think actually this week Canada didn't even chart. There's so many listeners in the UK and obviously in the United States, but in the UK and in Australia for some reason. Shout out to you, Melbourne, etc. Thanks for listening. But I don't know who the heck you are, and I don't need to. It's actually very helpful that anyone is even willing to listen to this. But since I got you on the phone, so to speak, and we're talking about what I imagine which initially interests you is the true crime element. I mean, that's how you fall into it, and that's I would account for some of the popularity. Well, I have you on the phone. There is this element from the victim perspective that I do need to introduce you to, and I don't want to treat it with kid gloves, and I don't want to ever pretend that I am the most put together person in the world, because I clearly am not. We've been talking about this for 24 podcasts when I thought we'd be doing 10, and even with those 24, and this is a particularly sort of rambling one. The next one will be much more structured. Take notice of that. In fact, there's a number coming up that are very, very structured. They just take more time to prepare. And I will, potentially, I will be in Canada. I will be in Canada this summer. And the plan is to take the show on the road, so to speak, and maybe do some broadcasts from Quebec and other places. Try that out, see how that plays out. But to dovetail back to this notion of the victim perspective again, it's not that I've been denying it. It's just that I think I needed to tell the other things first before we got into this layer of the story and the consuming nature of this responsibility, not just for me, for all the families I mentioned, because they might not have a podcast, but they do have an obsession for some resolution to the death of their loved one, and which will manifest itself in different ways for all of us. But it's not, I can assure you, don't ever talk to me about closure. Just avoid the cliches of the victim experience, please. We're quite sensitive to that. were not a cliche, I can assure you. And some of the work that some of us have done, Stefan Luce, certainly, the Priors, is incredibly creative and passionate and of such a unique nature. It's to be applauded and commended, and their persistence in these matters. A number of months ago, one of these crime victim families from the Montreal area, one individual who will remain nameless, contacted me, and she said, were you ever in the old Munich pub in downtown Montreal in the late 70s? Now, when she said this initially, I was thinking, old Munich, late 70s, well, that's where one of the cases, Joanne Houle, she was last seen at the old Munich. So I thought, oh, she's referring to this. Is she trying to insinuate or accuse me somehow in the matter of the death of Joanne Houle? And, anyway, I'm kind of doing the math and kind of, well, it doesn't make sense. I was 13 or 14, something like that. And trying to make sense of all this. And so I asked her, I replied, I said, well, no. And why do you ask me that? And she writes me back. She says, oh, I saw a boy in there one night when I was out drinking with friends. And I hoped it had been you. Very sweet. And strange world we live in. I'm going to do a little housekeeping, and then I'll wrap it up. I'll give you a coda to tie all this together. So the housekeeping is this: if you like what you hear, please review us on iTunes. It matters. Now, here's something I didn't know: iTunes follows the country. So if you're in Australia and you review it, only Australians can see the review. So I can't, and the only reviews I can see are the ones in the United States. I discovered this because there were a whole series of, and I don't look at them anymore because people are really mean. but somebody had posted some nice things to say, but I couldn't see them because they said them in Canada. But all the nasty things, hey, guess where they came from? The United States, 2017. So that's okay. I can handle it. But if you do like it, then by all means, and wherever you are, post something nice on iTunes. Say something nice about it. It creates a buzz or whatever. I don't know what you want to call it. I'm on Twitter. You can find me at Justice Guy. That's at JUSTUSGUY. Also have a plain old email if you want to communicate with me that way. It's theresaallore at gmail.com. THERESA ALLORE at gmail.com. And then, as always, there's the website, theresaallore.com. And that's where you can find all kinds of visual information that we may talk about on each episode. When you fly into the Montreal airport, if any of you have done that, particularly, well, I only do it international. So my experience when I fly into Montreal is you fly in, you do a whole lot of walking down these glass corridors. You clear customs in the big hall. This is at Pierre Elliott Trudeau Airport in Dorval. Once you clear customs and immigration, I guess it's immigration, then customs, you go through some double doors, and just before the moment you're about to exit into the main lobby of the terminal, there always are a poster of the top 10 cases in Quebec, or missing persons, actually. Now, in the past, I've seen Cedrica Provence on that poster, but she's been found since her remains were discovered, so she's obviously not there anymore. But I've seen in on past trips Nathalie Godbout, who we haven't seen since September 23rd, 2000. I've seen Marilyn Bergeron, who no one has seen since 2008. Marilyn Bergeron is 5'7" and weighed 115 pounds at the time of her disappearance. She had brown hair and green eyes. She had a tattoo of Pegasus just below her right collarbone. Anyone who might have information about Bergeron's disappearance is being asked to contact Marc Bellemare at 1-800-840-1526. This has been Who Killed Teresa? I'm your host, John Allure. Have a great afternoon.